This isn't rocket science. Transit planning is actually fundamentally very simple. Like, you look at a picture like this, and guess what? Every city handily provides a graph of density. You just have to look out, and you can recognize where the centers are. You can recognize where people are. And fundamentally, for high ridership transit, what we want to do is look at population density, map where the major activity centers are, draw lines that connect them. That's what gets you an effective transit system. Unfortunately, we're pretty darn bad at this. This is light rail running through cornfields. This happens to be St. Louis, but it is not the only example of this. In fact, if you look around the country, here are rail transit lines mapped on density in more than half a dozen different cities. And what's remarkable about this map is the degree to which transit actually avoids density. A lot of our transit systems are actively avoiding the places where the most people are. I've likened this to looking a little bit like airliners dodging thunderstorms. You can see lines actually trying to get out of the way of density. And so why do we do this so badly? A couple of reasons. One is we talk way too much about modes of transit. We are utterly obsessed with buses versus trains. And we start way too many discussions with something like, our city needs a streetcar. That really doesn't make sense as a statement. The statement that makes sense is, we have a corridor that connects these places, and we need service in that corridor that has this level of frequency and this level of reliability and this level of speed, and that can carry this many people. And then from that, we can decide on what mode might be appropriate. We also tend to hurry through system planning. And here's a chance where Pittsburgh can get this right, since from what I'm hearing, this may be a discussion that's coming up. We have a tendency to spend a couple of months deciding these are the major corridors we want to focus on. And a lot of that is often back of the envelope discussions, small political meetings. And then we spend years figuring out the details of those lines. The most important decisions is where in a metropolitan area you focus the transit investments. And we don't spend nearly enough time doing that. We also tend to talk about transit not as networks, but as individual lines. One rail transit line. And transit doesn't work that way. All of you who ride transit know that transit works as a series of connected routes. And the question is, how does adding a route or changing a route change that network as a whole? And we tend not to ask that question. We also tend to plan single-purpose transit. Here's a train in New Jersey. It is explicitly designed to get white-collar 9-to-5 commuters in and out of Manhattan. And everything about how it operates, how the fares are charged, and everything is designed for that one target market. That same train happens to pass through a bunch of towns that have a lot of other kinds of trips where that same rail line might be useful, but because we didn't design for them, we actually set up fares and schedules that make it not useful for them. Transit is effective if it serves a lot of different kinds of trips, not just one. We don't use data. We tend to plan transit systems based on our mental picture of what a city looks like rather than what it actually is. And we also tend to think at too large a scale. We tend to be impressed by big lines on a map. That in regional planning, longer projects often tend to get preference. This is the San Francisco Bay Area. Those red lines are BART. The thickness of the lines is how many people ride on each of those segments. The yellow highlights are all of the recent extensions. So you will notice that BART has been investing all of its money in the lowest ridership portions of the system, while in fact the middle is running out of capacity. Why is that? It's because there's an obsession with regionalism, an obsession of we want to connect more places to the system, and because frankly those things look more impressive on the network. I can show you a bus route in San Francisco that's 3 miles long that carries more people than all these yellow lines combined. But on a map it doesn't look nearly as impressive. And we also tend to think about the path transit takes rather than the destinations it gets to. We have a tendency to build along freeways and along railroad lines. Sometimes because we think if the freeway is congested, if we put transit right in the middle of the freeway, it'll be a sort of vacuum cleaner and it'll just suck up all of those cars. But everybody in those cars is going somewhere. And that's where the transit needs to go. And so again, focusing on the path is not nearly as useful as focusing on where people are actually going. And we tend to let NIMBYs drive a lot of our transit. This is an example in Austin. On the right is the rail line they should have built. the path that goes right through the middle of all of the major centers in Austin, downtown, the Capitol, the university. On the left is what they actually built. A line that was designed to follow existing freight rail because it had no political opposition, which in fact had no political opposition but doesn't have very many riders either. And in fact, I would say that one of the rules of transit is if you propose a transit project and nobody is against it, it's probably a bad project because you probably put it somewhere where there aren't any people.